Good morning, everybody. Today's proceedings are going to be broadcast, but after a 10-minute delay. Those with mobile devices may use them to report what they are hearing in the hearing room, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. They may not be used for recording or photography. May the witness be sworn, please.
Do you need to stand up?
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly,
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth. Morning, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Grover. Please sit down. Yes.
Could you tell us your full name, please?
My full name is Suresh Grover.
Mr. Grover, you gave a signed 58-page witness statement to the inquiry that was dated the 30th of April this year. Please could you confirm that the contents of your witness statement are true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I can confirm they are true.
Mr. Grover, just a signpost for you, the topics I will be covering today, they will include the formation of the Southall Monitoring Group, the Stephen Lawrence campaign, the reporting of undercover officer HN81 David Hagan. We will look at a number of his reports, mostly covering the 1998 hearings of the Lawrence inquiry. I'll also be asking you questions about Peter Francis, your experience of racism and the police more generally, and finally, the impact that SDS reporting has had on you. Let me begin, though, by asking you about the formation of the Southall Monitoring Group. And you explain in your statement how this first came about at paragraph 7 on page 2. Let us begin with your activism. You have indicated in your statement that you became active when you were as young as 19 years of age. Could you just tell us a bit about that, how you first became interested?
I was racially attacked and stabbed by skinheads outside a cinema. I wasn't conscious about racism at that time, but it was a telling moment for me in my life because before that I didn't see myself as very different from any other student or kid of my generation, and because of the lack of response from the police on that issue. My father represented me. He was a member of the Community Relations Council in Nelson, but the perpetrator walked outside our door every day. He was known to people, etc., and it really drove me to look at what racism and the impact of racism on our communities.
After that personal attack on you, were there any other events that drove you to become involved in activism at that time?
There were incidents from 19 right up to when I was 21. I moved to Southall in 1975, 76. And on 4th of June 1976, I was outside a cinema called Dominion Cinema, and I saw a pool of blood. We didn't have, mobile phones at the time or social media. There was a reporting on the radio that somebody had been murdered, a young student called Gurdeep Singh Chaggar, and I saw a police officer at the pool of blood, and I went to him and I asked him what happened, and he just said to me, "Look, this is Indian blood, just go away." And the way he said it was as if it was dirty blood. And that inspired a lot of young people in Southall to set up the Southall Youth Movement and come out on the streets against racial violence, because Chaggar's murder was not just the first one. Abdul Malik had been killed in Southall outside a bus stop in Greenford as a result of what was known as busing in Southall. And then from 76 onwards, we did a lot of cases on racial violence on estates. I got heavily involved in the Blair Peach issue in 1979.
So is this before the Southall Monitoring Group began?
Yeah, absolutely. Blair Peach was murdered on 23rd of April 1979, and the Southall Monitoring Group was established in 1980-81.
Could you help us with how that group began in 1980-81?
There were a number of factors that influenced us. The first was the murder of Blair Peach in Southall and how the police responded. I can give you the details if you ask me, but it was almost a very militaristic occupation of Southall, resulting in 800 people being arrested who were demonstrating peacefully. In a matter of 4 hours, 345 people were charged. There were serious injuries on people. I saw, it was raining that day, I saw a priest trying to help a woman who was arrested and truncheoned by police officers. There was a scale of violence I hadn't seen.
Just being specific, you mentioned Blair Peach. Could you just tell us a little bit more? Who was he and what happened to him came to your attention?
Blair Peach was born in New Zealand. He was resident in UK. He taught disabled children and people with learning difficulties in East End. He was a member of Anti-Nazi League. He ended up in Southall on 23rd of April because it was a call for a national demonstration against the National Front, who'd come to Southall, wanted a public meeting, openly calling for repatriation of anybody who was black and brown or migrant, erasing Southall as a town and creating an English hamlet. That's how they phrased it. And there was widespread opposition from very diverse communities, from white, black, brown communities. Southall mobilized through the Indian Workers Association, through Anti-Nazi League, Young Southall Youth Movement and other young people. The whole factories came out on strike in Southall around 2 o'clock, when the shift changed from 6 to 2, etc. The National Front was supposed to be arriving at 7:30. I think Blair had arrived in Southall with his friends much earlier, and I obviously never met him. I met his partner, Celia Stubbs, soon after, but Blair Peach was he was clubbed to death or clubbed to coma at the corner of Orchard Avenue and Beatrix Avenue while he was standing, and he was taken to hospital and pronounced dead. So we only learned of Blair Peach's death the morning after. I learned a lot about Blair Peach after the event because his friends set up Friends of Blair Peach campaign. I attended the inquest that looked into his death and the cause of death, which was chaired by I think it was John Burton. I'm not sure whether it was Sir John Burton or Dr. John Burton at West London. And what really struck me was that he was a man who ended up in Southall purely to offer solidarity to people who were under siege of racial violence, and they were protesting against the National Front, who were openly calling for, deportations, etc., or people settled here. And he ends up dead. And there is no serious investigation that looks at who's responsible for it. And so there's a demand on who killed Blair Peach. But at the inquest, what struck me was that there was a assertion by the Metropolitan Police that the reason why he died was because he had a thin cranium. It wasn't just the ferocity of the blow, but because somehow he was responsible for having a thin cranium. That outraged a lot of us. And then Dr. John Burton kind of, out of nowhere, created this theory that Blair Peach may have been killed by a left-wing activist to make him a martyr. There's no evidence of it whatsoever. And that kind of assertion, when somebody is dead, when somebody's been murdered, makes people think of what the state is doing, and etc.
And not just people, but you did something about it because you started the Southall Monitoring Group. itself.
That's right.
I wonder if we could put up on screen page 4, paragraph 14 of your statement, because in describing the purpose why the Southern Monitoring Group were established, you set out here to challenge racism, and you make the point that from the beginning you were also confronted with the prevalence of domestic violence against women. Now, I wonder if you could just help us with the genesis of the Southern Monitoring Groups. It wasn't just about racism, but perhaps the domestic violence issue as well is less talked about. Could you just help us with that, please?
Yeah, we were embedded in the Asian and African Caribbean communities. So the issues that affected us were racism, domestic violence, issues to do with communal violence between different religious groups, etc. So we took them all on and made very strong representations of local authorities. So on domestic violence, when we set up the South Monitoring Group, I remember the first 50 cases that we got, out of which 39 were domestic violence cases. And that's because there was very strong patriarchy in our community, and we wanted to challenge it as young people. We wanted to support women unconditionally if they wanted to leave their husband because of violence. And we wanted to set up and support women's organizations who wanted to develop things autonomously in a self-organized way. So the Southall Black Sisters came out of the women of the Southall Monitoring Group, although they'd been established in 1979 post-Blair Peach's murder, really got funding from 82 onwards. And we thought, at a very simple level, so what we thought was it was not possible for us to live in a society where women were treated unequally, and they were part and parcel of the struggle that was taking place for equality and justice, and not just against racism. We were influenced by a lot of women, very strong women in Southall nationally, both in terms of writing, people like Sheila Rothbottom, Simone de Beauvoir, and all that kind of stuff. So we took that as part of a vision that we had.
In terms of influences, I'm going to ask you about the influences from the USA, particularly with that term monitoring, so the Southern Monitoring Group. Could you assist us with where that particular term came from?
Well, yeah, it came from the Black Panther Party, which was actually known as the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense in US. There were young black activists who were campaigning against racism, police brutality, and poverty. They created a 10-point program to alleviate poverty and bring people in. But the word monitoring comes from police officers. As you know, in America, you have the right to bear arms constitutionally. But the origin of that is for slave owners to create arms, not for the slaves or people who were treated as slaves to have arms. And the Black Panther Party created this notion that everybody should be able to bear arms if they want to defend or if they're under siege. And there were a lot of hostility by police officers when black people defended themselves. And what happened was there are cases and examples of brutality taking place against black people in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles. And the Black Panther Party are monitoring what is happening in terms of recording it and also following police officers and identifying them, etc. That's where the word comes from. We were not conscious about data collection in the 1970s. That came much later. So that's what the origin is. It encapsulates a focus on police and racism, specifically institutionalized racism, not just issues to do with violence against people, but also to hold police to account in a way that wasn't defined at that time.
Well, in terms of holding the police to account and the work that was conducted by the Southern Monitoring Group, I wonder if we could just go to page 5, paragraph 18 of your statement. It is impossible today to go through all of the work that Southern Monitoring Group have done over the decades, but what you have set out here is a very brief summary in this paragraph that you provided support for over 300 families affected by the death of a loved one. And then this, we have provided trauma support for over 1,500 victims of racism over the last decade. Now, just in terms of that statistic, could you translate that into sort of practically what that meant for you and your day-to-day life? How did you and the Southall Monitoring Group provide trauma support for so many people?
That 1,500 refers to after we become the monitoring group, not Southall Monitoring Group. So it's over a period of the inception of Southall Monitoring Group until I make this statement. So it was obvious to us that black people and brown people who suffer racism do not suffer just physically but also very emotionally. It's traumatic, and the impact of racism doesn't have impact on just the person who is suffering racism. For example, if it's an attack on a house, it impacts the whole family. If it's an attack in school, it impacts other school children, and it is a crime that impacts on a whole community, especially when it's death or serious crime. So we came up with this notion of developing a trauma therapy service for victims of racism, and it was about offering professional, needs-based, culturally based service to victims of racism, especially if they'd suffered serious offenses or were unable to navigate their life because of mental breakdowns or mental health problems, or because the impact was so severe they couldn't, you know,
Before doing so, I want to ask you about something you've set out at paragraph 25, page 14 of your statements, that you describe as the first revelation of any police surveillance by special branch. And I wonder if you could please, in your own words, just tell us about that in 1989, please.
What page are we saying? Sorry.
Page 14. I'm grateful we have the paragraph up on screen there.
Yeah. David Rose, who was an investigating journalist at The Guardian, has contacted us about the work we were doing, and we were heavily involved in supporting our family in Hounslow. And his article covers the whole spectrum of what the family went through. I'm not going to name them, but they had series of incidents at an off-license shop. Perpetrators are identified. There's lots of representation made to Hounslow Council. But there is also quite vociferous campaign by the Chief Superintendent, who doesn't believe they're victims of racism, against the Hounslow and Southall Monitoring Group. And he told us that he had found that there was surveillance by the special branch of the Southall Monitoring Group by a officer called PC Black, I think, PJE Black. And he said that the report stated that a number of councillors had given information to him, to the police officer, to the special branch, worried about the influence that we had, and in Southall, and that they believed that we were a cell of the GLC Labour Council.
So this is really the first inkling that you yourself had that special branch were showing an interest in you?
Absolutely. I had no other information before that.
Now, over the years, the effects of that, but also undercover reporting, I just want to turn to what you have set out at paragraph 28. It's page 15 of your statement. It is over the years, the practical effects, and we will address in due course the impact this has had on you, but you've set out there what you've noticed before you knew, for example, about any undercover police reporting by the SDS. But could you just talk us through, before this was revealed to you, the sort of trends that you were experiencing in the monitoring group, please?
Yeah, I mean, local politicians have come to us and have said to us that because there are discussions about Southall Monitoring Group and the monitoring group with senior police officers, they are afraid to refer cases to us, or they are afraid to get involved in those campaigns. We've noticed in our public meetings non-uniformed officers being present, taking notes of what is being said by either myself or other members of the monitoring group. There's always information on which campaigns we are and who's at the table speaking. We were told by the London Funders Group that there is caution in funding us because of the reports that are going to funders about us as being anti-police, for example, and use that in inverted commas. Over a course of years, we've had a number of robberies where nothing's been missing apart from documents at the office or in my car at pivotal moments, including during the Stephen Lawrence campaign. I have, not recently, but during the campaigns, especially when they become high profile, stopped and searched in South and other areas, personally on a number of occasions. And there are comments made by serving officers as well as retired officers on how the monitoring group is perceived by senior officers.
We are concerned with what justification was there for undercover officers to be deployed spying on certain individuals, certain groups, and to what extent, if any, was it justified? I'd like to ask you about public disorder. In terms of justification, if there was a suggestion that there was some justification on undercover officers keeping an eye on you in particular, the monitoring group in general, because it could be helpful in addressing public disorder. What is your reaction to that suggestion, that as a justification, particularly in relation to you and your group?
We've never encouraged violence or public disorder. The only activity that I've been involved is really defending people when they've been attacked, or being there when, in terms of defense. I don't think there's any shred of evidence prior to the Lawrence inquiry or during the Lawrence inquiry. In fact, I think there's evidence they think that I'm more reliable, making sure that there won't be public disorder. So I don't know where that is coming from, to be honest with you.
I would like to turn now to the Stephen Lawrence campaign. In doing so, I'd first like your response to a document I'm going to ask to be put up on screen. It is MPS 0748392. So this is at your tab B12. This is a special branch note dated the 10th of September 1998 in relation to the Stephen Lawrence campaign. I wonder if we can turn over the page, please. Now, you can see this special branch note going into detail about the campaign. But I'd like to ask you in particular about some of the references in this document, please. Under introduction, you can see the first paragraph. It refers to, furthermore, the sense of anger and alienation that this issue has aroused within the black community means that the possibility of public disorder cannot be discounted. Now, I would like your view on the accuracy of the various things that are set out in this special branch note. Would you accept that that is accurate, that there was a sense of anger and alienation, and also that there was the possibility of public disorder as set out here? As far as that sentence is concerned, would you agree with that?
I think there's a lot of anger. I think there's a lot of suspicion that this issue of racism and police racism won't be dealt with, and that's where the anger is coming from. I think what's happening is that the Lawrence case is seen as an example or a face of a greater tragedy that's the black communities and the brown communities have suffered over decades, if not centuries. So there is frustration that we are in 1999, 1998, and the British government still, or the British state, doesn't acknowledge that problem of racism. And it has the potential to lead to public disorder depending on what happens, yeah.
What about this suggestion that this almost acts as a magnet for these other groups to come in? Because you can see the second paragraph there, the last sentence. A number of groups and individuals see this issue as a natural platform from which to further their own, often extreme political agenda. Do you accept that there is truth in that sentence, that significant campaigns such as this one would attract groups that maybe are taking advantage of it for their own political agenda, and some of those groups being extreme?
I don't think that applies only to certain groups that are mentioned in the inquiry. The Lawrence campaign and the Lawrence family have become a magnet during the inquiry to a large number of people. And some people in the mainstream political parties are taking advantage. Groups are there trying to get very close to the Lawrence campaign because they have their own agenda or their own aims and objectives, but there's no threat of public disorder taking place or any incident or any talk publicly about people coming out of the streets and creating a situation which is uncontrollable. And if there was even a sniff of that, then the Lawrence family was very clear that they would have nothing to do with violence and that we would make sure that there would be no violence or public disorder.
I want to ask about a comment that was specifically written about you. It's on the first page of this. I wonder if you can just scroll down. Now, can you see at the bottom, under the Lawrence family group, this is written: the LFCG has on the surface remained independent of the extremist groups. However, leading figures within the campaign are well known within left-wing organisations. Suresh Grover, who is the spokesman of the campaign, has long been the de facto head of the Southern Monitoring Group, now simply known as the Monitoring Group. And then this: he has a checkered past involving a number of Trotskyist groups and a high profile amongst the West London Asian community. What was your reaction when you first read this special branch note referring to you as having a checkered past?
I read it in two ways. I think it's so shallow. It doesn't bear any resemblance to the reality. I don't know what they mean by a checkered past, number of Trotskyist groups. I've never been a member of any political party, ever. I have, obviously, during the course of campaigns, whether it's real campaign or the campaigns you mentioned, met people from groups that are Trotskyist groups. I don't have an issue with talking to people. I've always talked to them. I don't even have a problem with Trotskyist groups. I have worked with them. I have read Trotsky. It's not an issue for me. But I've never belonged to them. I don't know what they mean by checkered past. The second thing that came to mind was, well, actually, they're spying on me, and I'm not getting the information. So if they have information that I've been member or linked to some Trotskyist party, at least I should know what information they have.
Well, it doesn't stop there. I wonder if we can just turn to page 3 in this document. So the next paragraph goes on to say that Grover has been successful in maintaining the campaign in the public eye. However, he is in danger of losing some support amongst his Asian power base, as many feel he has aligned himself too closely with what they perceive as an Afro-Caribbean dominated campaign. And then this: furthermore, Grover has had to exercise restraint in his public pronouncements in order to retain his public funding. Now, just pausing there, what is your reaction to reading that you have had to tailor your activism, that you have had to act in a certain way in order to retain public funding?
I don't think I had a public profile. If you look at the newspaper, there's only one article that mentions me post-Lawrence. People who have public profile, the Lawrence is rightly, and all that stuff that's coming out. I'm known amongst families, but I don't have a press public profile. In fact, a lot of people wouldn't associate the Southern Monitoring Group or the Monitoring Group with the campaigns that we've led, because the centrality of the families are very critical to us, and it is the families that get to know, not my name or other names. That's the first point. The second thing is that this idea that you pick a campaign because it's Asian, you pick a campaign because it's Chinese, it's Afro-Caribbean, it's just cloud cuckoo land. I've never acted in that way. Families come to us, and they can be any race or nationality, and we would support them if we have the resources and we believe that we have the capability and the expertise to do that. So it just happened. I was dealing with the Lawrences, who are from the Caribbean origin, Michael Manson, who are African, and Ricky, which is Asian.
Well-
the Asian community actually supported the Lawrence campaign. They didn't see it as different from their own experience, etc. So I just think this idea that I think that there's no understanding by the UCO or whoever's written it of how family campaigns are developed and what the anatomy of those campaigns are.
I want to draw your attention to the rest of what is written about you in this special branch report. It says that Grover privately agrees that the militancy that the inquiry has generated must be built on, and he has promised the MFJ, so the Movement for Justice, leadership a place on the organising committee for the National Civil Rights March, planned for later this year. Is that accurate, that you privately at the time agreed that the militancy that the Stephen Lawrence inquiry generated must be built on?
No, I don't agree with that, because I think there is nothing more radical than taking on the state and exposing it for its racism or its neglect or its acts of omission. Just by saying that you're militant doesn't mean that you're more militant than the other person. There's nothing that stops us. I mean, what is happening is that there is the family campaign, which is an amalgamation of the family, the lawyers, and the campaign itself working in tandem. What frightens people is that the family does not believe that it should be influenced irrationally by people, or any other irrational actions. They have the right to do that. Their purpose is to find the truth of what happened to Stephen and who was responsible for it and how the state is accountable. They've gone through, since 1993, unprecedented actions to get to the inquiry. You know, they've had the lawyer asking questions from the police. They had the commission, the CRE chair, who was Herman Housley, writing to the police saying, this is such an important case. There's been other gracious murders in the area from Gurdeep Bangal, Roland Adams, and other people. So you need to take this seriously. They've had what I would say, racist attitudes from the police about evidence coming in. They've had a world statesman called Nelson Mandela visiting that, making a statement that black lives are as cheap in this country as in South Africa, which is where the press get involved. That's a pivotal statement. That's a pivotal signpost in that campaign. And then they get into the inquest. The inquest decides it's not just a non-fatal killing because there's evidence, but for the first time it says that it is racially motivated. And that's actually what prompted Jack Straw, who's the Shadow Home Secretary, to say that he would have a public inquiry. So the roadmap to the inquiry is led by the family and its supporters and its campaign. It's very important to remember that. And it is the influence. So during the inquiry, it's just...
I'm going to be asking you firstly about how you became involved in Stephen Lawrence inquiry. But before I do, may I just ask you about one more paragraph in this document, then we'll move on to that subject. It's in fact the next paragraph. Thank you. It's really the tone and the way in which, again, your work is described, because it says here, his, referring to you, his next cause celeb is the Justice for Ricky Reel campaign, which he will promote as the racial murder of an Asian youth that has met police indifference and racism. Furthermore, it gives Grover the opportunity to win back support from his Asian constituency. Imran Khan is the Lawrence family lawyer and a prominent member of Arthur Scargill's Socialist Labour Party. Despite approaching the inquiry with a left-wing agenda, he is unlikely to make any overtly political statements. And so you're described in some senses as a political figure, as using campaigns, that the Ricky Reel campaign was a cause célèbre for you. It suggests that it was an opportunity here for you to win back support. What's your reaction to reading the nature of your work described in this way?
I think it's racist stereotyping of me. I think that, the families are contacting me. I'm not going to the families, and I'm not ambulance chasing of different people of different nationalities suffering murder. The Ricky Real family contacted me. I didn't contact them. And there is this idea that the Asian communities would only suffer or only support Asian campaigns. It's just, I don't know where that is coming from, but it's a very shallow level of understanding of where the communities are for intelligence officers. And I think in the real case, I didn't have to say it was racist. It was recorded as a racial attack before I got involved. You know, it's his friends who told the police that there was racial abuse by the time there was a fight, and that's when Ricky went missing. So I didn't have to invent this notion of racism. It was already recorded by the police. And we did not work in that period. In fact, we do not now work in a period where we are insular as Asian people. I actually call myself black because I believed in the word political black. I don't know whether I need to explain that. We called ourselves as the black community, which meant a mixture of anybody who'd come from colonial countries and suffered racism, including Irish people, right? So this idea that I'm looking at myself as a monolithic Asian person and looking at me as an Afro-Caribbean, it's never been the ethos of the Southall Monitoring Group. It's never been the ethos of anybody who's worked at the Southall Monitoring Group or the Monitoring Group. In fact, we would reject that kind of insular attitude that politicians may have, and we've never ever thought of this as a political campaign for gaining support from people on a Machiavellian basis. This has been purely to support a family because of the injustice that they've suffered.
Let's turn to the Stephen Lawrence campaign. This is set out in detail in your statement, beginning on page 19. Could you help us, and it's referred to in paragraph 44 of your statement, how you became first involved with the Lawrence family and when that was, please? So if assists, it's page 19 of Mr. Grover's statement, paragraph 44. Could you help us with how you first became involved? How did it all begin as far as you were concerned?
I was visited at home by a family friend, a family relative who came to my house and explained that they needed someone who they could rely on and support the family in the quest for justice. They'd had people supporting them, but there had been difficulties, and they asked me what I would do, and I gave them a model that we'd worked on other campaigns, which is where the family would be central. At that time, there was justice for Stephen Lawrence kind of public profile. There wasn't a campaign established with the family. So the contact to me came from the family. I had been to the funeral because as a matter of practice, if somebody dies from a racial violence or practice, and if we know people, we just end up at a funeral and just pay our respects. But I hadn't met the family.
Now, you've just said that the family is central to the work that you carry out, and you set this out in paragraph 50 on page 20. But I'm going to ask you to provide some more detail about your interaction with Doreen and Neville Lawrence. So you've described how you were approached. As the inquiry got underway, could you just assist us with the day-to-day contact and the nature of that contact with Doreen and Neville Lawrence, please?
This is before the inquiry. It's not during the inquiry. So Mrs. Lawrence becomes a staff member much earlier than the inquiry. It was actually after the inquest and before the inquiry. This is referring to her as a staff member of the Southall Monitoring Group. But to answer your question, during the inquiry and during the inquiry, very similar to during the prior prosecution period, daily contact. The offices were based in Southall. we'd already established the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign during the private prosecution period, and I and a couple of other people met Mrs. Lawrence and Mr. Lawrence, worked out what the terms would be for the campaign itself. It was about getting public support. The family didn't look. The inquiry lasted. I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood your question. If I have, you're asking me what the daily contact during the inquiry period was as it started. I was at the inquiry. I think it lasted 59 days or 60 days in the first phase, and about 10. I was there every day. I was there. I spoke to Doreen and Neville on a daily basis. I was in the room sharing with them. We were concerned about the issues of safety, so sometimes I accompanied them to the car park. There were discussions about what the evidence was coming out. There were suggestions by us on how more people could get involved. The first couple of days, there were press, but not many people from the public. There were families that I knew. The Manson family were there, the Ricky family were there, and other families were there. So, there's very clear kind of marker with the family that we would only work under their leadership, under their guidance, but it would be about making sure that the public were at the inquiry because it's a public inquiry.
Now, earlier in your evidence, you gave us some examples, and we have many, many more examples in your statement of the various families that you've worked with over the years. But in terms of the Lawrences, before the inquiry began, as you indicate here, you refer to Doreen becoming a staff member of the Southall Monitoring Group. And I just want to ask you about that in terms of how close you were with the Lawrences. Were you particularly close with them, as reflected by the fact that, as you set out here, Doreen Lawrence even became a staff member of the Southall Monitoring Group?
I was close to both of them. I got with both of them. They have totally different personalities. I gotten with them. I think, I was very conscious that lost someone in such an awful circumstances. It at that time seemed the very long road to getting any justice done. The issue of the public inquiry hadn't been resolved. We were still way back then, and it was about supporting, caring, making sure that Doreen was able to concentrate on other things apart from just Stephen. We had a vacancy, it was advertised, and she got the post. I didn't manage her, somebody else managed her. But I would say I would have done anything for them. It's not an issue. There was a lot of friendship. I visited them on a regular basis. I actually do that with all the families I deal with. It's not just the Lawrences, but the relationship became special as the inquiry went on because of the intensity and the publicity about it.
When you take on a campaign such as this one, how much of your life does it take up? How much of your time? Could you just paint us a picture of how much time you spend on these cases?
Remember, I'm not being paid for it. It's not a campaign that way we get money to be paid. I'm working with the Southall Monitoring Group, but they're giving me time off to do the work, or if there's an agreed timetable for me to work, then I get paid for it. So it is totally on a voluntary basis. It takes your, at the inquiry level, you're there on the first, you're dealing with, it just takes over the whole life. You are there to provide emotional support. You're talking about strategy with lawyers. You're talking about bringing people in. You're responding to people's demands. We had a very cordial and professional relationship with the chair and the assessors. So if something was asked, we did it. Like, for example, getting the hall when the suspects came. The public gallery was full. It was my job to liaise with everybody who turned up, who wanted to support the family. Even if there hadn't been an inquiry, in the periods before the inquiry, because we are totally, it's almost a Gandhian selfless model. You just give, you want to, ensure that people are strong. You make them strong by offering them support. You know that the state has huge amount of resources. It has the presses on its side. It has the apparatus in terms of legal resources on its side. You're applying for legal aid. You may not get legal aid. The work that was done on the Lawrences from 1993 until the inquiry was absolutely pro bono by the lawyers. They had no funding for it. So it is teamwork. It's passionate. It's commitment at a level that people see their own experience through the tragedy that the Lawrences are suffering, and they want things to change.
In relation to this, the teamwork and the support, we have seen there are references firstly to the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, but also the Stephen Lawrence Family Public Support Group. Could you just help us with the distinction between those? How did the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, how did that group differ from the Stephen Lawrence Family Public Support Group?
There's only one formalized campaign, and that's the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign. It has a family, it has the lawyers, it has people that I know or other people that the Lawrences know, like Ross House, etc. So it's a very small group of people. It's everybody that the family trusts, and you've recommended names of people who have specific expertise. So if you need trade union support, you get somebody who's very close to trade unions. If you know somebody who is good with the press, etc., you get that person. But the support group is never an official group. It's not even known as a support group. It's known as a supporters group. What's happening is that at the inquiry, a lot of people are coming. They want to offer their support. There are justice campaigns already established from Ricky Reel, Michael Manson. The Monovilles are here at the moment. They're all coming and they want to offer support. They cannot be part of the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, so another alternative informal structure is being created by me, so you liaise with them. There are people in the public gallery who want to offer support. There are young people who want to get involved in justice campaigns or want to become lawyers. They want to come to the inquiry and learn what the process is. So they are part of the staff. And we get the new monitoring project people, especially 3 of them, mentioned in the inquiry. They're part of the broader group as well as the Lawrence campaign. And so it's me trying to devise an informal mechanism where I'm asking for them to support the Lawrences, but I want to be respectful to them and say, look, you have an interest in this inquiry as well. You cannot dictate what the Lawrences want to do, but you can actually learn, you can develop your own political models or social models, and that's how it's been established.
I want to ask you about how things evolved, because you describe, I think at the first day of that inquiry, there were only about, I think you refer to only about a dozen or so people attended. And of course we know as the inquiry progressed, more and more people attended. Could you just help us with how it evolved and your role in the numbers increasing, who the people attending were?
We had a formal meeting with the Lawrences about that, so about how we would generate support, what my role would be, and so once the Lawrences agreed there would be this Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, I wasn't given the role of as a coordinator. It was a de facto role of coordinating the whole stuff. There were a number of elements that I had to, there are a number of outcomes that I had to deliver. One was to generate public support to the inquiry. And to be honest, we went on a soapbox. In Elephant and Castle, there's a shopping centre. Started speaking.
Who was on the soapbox?
I was on the soapbox, speaking about the Lawrence stuff, the experiences. London South Bank University is very close to it. I went to South Bank University. Other people went to other universities. We managed to contact everyone that we knew from previous campaigns or people who've been involved to come. And apart from that physical work, there was also leafleting about the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, just just indicating what it was and why I think it was important. That was being distributed. But as the inquiry went on, the first day is an important, people don't talk about it, but it's a very crucial period as far as the public is concerned. And that is the Lawrence family standing up and asking Sir William Macpherson to recluse himself. And that generates a huge amount of publicity. Obviously, he says it's up to the Home Secretary, and he's still there. But it showed to a large number of people that the Lawrences were very serious about getting into the truth, and they were not going to be compromising in their advocacy to get to the truth. And what happens is, because the press are there, and it's the first time there's a public inquiry into a death or a murder, never mind a racially motivated murder. It's a unique, seminal inquiry, and the press are picking up on a daily basis of what is coming out in evidence, and it's being reported on a daily basis in print media or on television. And that also generates discussion and debate, etc., in political as well as other circles. So people are gravitating to the inquiry, thinking this is unusual and unique.
People gravitating there. Are you in the role of a coordinator, or are you, or not? How?
I'm doing everything for the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, motivating people, liaising with people, engaging with people, reporting back to the Lawrences and the legal team, talking to everyone.
We heard from Alex Owolade yesterday, just as an example. So what would your contact have been with him in your role as a coordinator? Could you just give us an idea of the level of contact, just as an example?
I only met Alex on the first day of the inquiry, not even the first day, maybe the first week of the inquiry. I didn't know anything about Alex. I had heard of Movement of Justice, but never worked with them. They were never involved in the lead up to the inquiry with the Lawrences or any other steps that the Lawrence family had taken through the legal team. I think after the 59 days I was there, maybe I spoke to him. I saw him quite often, especially when there were significant dates like the suspects being there, or Commissioner giving evidence, or the Lawrences giving evidence. But I think I must have spoken to him maybe 5 times, not more than that.
I want to ask you about something very specific, and it's something, and we will go into what Peter Francis has said in greater detail later. But I wonder if we could perhaps call up Peter Francis's witness statement, please. It's UCPI 5036012. It's page 84, paragraph 509. I just want to ask you about this. So this is Peter Francis saying, through Lewis, I received some bits of information about Doreen Lawrence, which he had received from people like Suresh Grover, with whom Lewis was close. There was a rumour that did not reflect well on Doreen and had the potential to be used to discredit her, if true. I reported that on to HN86 verbally. I did not feel it was enough significance to write up in a report. I do not know what HN86 did with that information, if anything. Okay. So firstly, what it says here is that you were close with Lewis. So just on that, when Peter Francis says in his statement that you were close with Lewis, is that true?
No, it's not true. I have seen him, spoken to him, but I wouldn't say I was close to anybody from Movement for Justice.
So the suggestion here is that Lewis received some personal information about Doreen Lawrence that he said he'd received from people like you about a rumour. What's your reaction to that? Essentially, tittle-tattle being passed on from you to Lewis, and then Peter Francis, the undercover officer, gets to hear about it. What's your reaction to reading that, please?
I think it's scandalous that I would even speak to Lewis about something very something that Doreen Ward did or did not do. I would never do that. I think it's scandalous. I wouldn't even think of spreading a rumor about Mrs. Lawrence, never mind say it to someone I wasn't close to, or even if I was close to them, I wouldn't do it. I think it's a drama being created which is not at the center of the inquiry.
If someone were to suggest, you have just described how you are interacting, coordinating with very, very many people, whether, in fact, is it not possible that you did have discussions with Lewis, and during those discussions that you did reveal some of the things that may have been mentioned to you or that you picked up in confidence. If someone were to suggest, well, maybe that's something you just haven't recalled because you're dealing with so many people, can I just give you an opportunity to respond to that?
I'm always very cordial and always respectful to people, regardless of whether I agree with them politically or not. And I always thanked people for coming to the inquiry, regardless of what their views were, because I think people taking their time out to support the Lawrence inquiry is very important. But I would never, ever, and I haven't ever spoken about people's personal, especially the Lawrences or any other family member, any personal issues, any rumors they may be spread to people that I'm not close to. I am not close to the movement for justice. I'm listening to them. I respect what they say. I'm not agreeing with them. And I have a totally different ethos and philosophy and strategy at the inquiry than they do. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there, that they shouldn't be engaged, they should be, etc. It's not a problem for me. And I'm not dismissive of them. But I know what this rumor is. I just find it shocking that it's been attributed to me. The reality is that that rumor has no foundation whatsoever, because my impression of the day that Stephen was killed, the family were looking for him. That's what I know for certain. So.
Stephen Lawrence inquiries are beginning in March 1998. So that period where you are there coordinating, supporting the family, that year you were reported on by an undercover SDS officer, HN81. So he had the undercover name David Hagen. And I wonder if we could just turn in your statement to its paragraph 98 on page 32, please, because I'd like to ask you questions about this particular undercover officer, in particular his reporting and the accuracy of that. But in terms of this UCO, as you state here, and is this right, that you have no idea whether you met him or not?
I have no idea whether I met him. I first became aware of his name through Movement of Justice after I spoke to Peter Francis with his solicitor, some time ago. And I think it was Tony Gard who gave me the name David Hagen. But I don't think I've been told by Peter Francis that I probably met him on the last day of the inquiry, but I can't be certain that was it him or not.
I'm going to ask you about something that David Hagen has said in his witness statement. It's MPS 0748378. It's page 39 of David Hagen's statement. We'll just wait for that document to be brought up on screen. And so I want to ask you about, it's his suggestion that the reporting on the Stephen Lawrence campaign, that was the focus. And so the suggestion that, so your group, the monitoring group, this idea of potentially incidental reporting. But if we just have a look at paragraph 121. So he says in his statement, the Ellison, 121 please, the Ellison review finding that describes me as a spy in the Lawrence family camp is neither accurate nor fair, particularly because it does not accurately reflect the narrative element of his report. The report states that the intelligence I provided touched on the Lawrence family campaign and that I was, quote, well placed in one of the groups that associated itself with and tried to build relationships with both the Lawrence family and other groups during the public inquiry. That is an accurate description of this part of my deployment. And then he says, it seems I did not disagree with Mr. Ellison QC's premise that I was, quote, a police spy in the wider Lawrence camp, when perhaps I should have done. I believe I was more on the edges than even that statement indicates. The crucial nuance is lost between wider Lawrence camp and Lawrence family camp in the above finding. A number of groups pitched their metaphorical tents around the Lawrence family for various, often self-interested reasons. The MFJ was barely tolerated by the campaign. Counsel to this inquiry demonstrated lack of understanding of the Ellison report and the overall context of my deployment when he repeated the disputed finding in his opening statement. I was not a spy in the Lawrence family camp. And so in relation to David Hagan's reference there to not, in fact, being a spy in relation to the Stephen Lawrence campaign, but that he was focused on, for example, groups such as Movement for Justice. And so any reporting that may overlap with, say, the family, and in particular, say, you and the monitoring group, that the suggestion that may have been incidental. What is your reaction to the suggestion that, well, the reports, and we will come on to the reports in which you were mentioned, yes, you are referred to, but it's incidental reporting that is, in effect, that you were reported on in some senses, but by accident, just hoovering up all the intelligence. What's your reaction to that?
Hagan is not involved in the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, but there is a wider campaign which is not called the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, but it's referred to by people as the Lawrence campaign, and I called it the support group. I think there are a lot of people trying to influence through us, the family, and that's what's happening. There are issues to do with whether we should hold a demonstration or not, etc., etc. We should call for Condon's resignation in the Met Commission and things like that. But he's not in the Lawrence camp. But I don't know whether he came to the inquiry. But the MFJ and other groups are trying to influence me with their actions and I think that is accurate. But I think that is absolutely accurate. But I just want to make it clear. Over the 59 days, the number of people who are coming, the vast majority are very independent, not associated with any groups. They are taxi drivers, they are women living in the local area, they are people in self-organized community groups, there are families affecting justice. The MFJ, the Anti-Nazi League, are only peripheral to that. But through the meetings that we're organizing to report on a daily basis, or through the offices that we have, there are people trying to say, would you want to do that? Can we do that? This is what we think you should happen, etc.
All right. But before turning to the reports that he produced that refer to you, I just want to ask you about another document where he does mention you, and it is, I wonder if we can insert your tab B35. It's MPS 0721026, please. Page 8 of that document. So this document is, it's notes of a meeting between David Hagan and Mark Ellison on the 22nd of October 2013. So it is in note form, but we can see on page 8, towards the bottom of the page, so ME, that's Mark Ellison, and WT, that's David Hagan. So he says, he asked, did your presence in the movement for justice involve being in the room with the Lawrences? And David Hagan replies, we never sat in a room in a small group. MFJ wanted to take over or strongly influence the campaign, trying to get close to the Lawrences. I have a recollection of meeting with Suresh Grover and Imran Khan. AO, a reference to Alex Owolade, was trying to get close to Suresh Grover. We went to public meetings. Lawrence wanted to thank people. MFJ did not get as close as they wanted. Lawrences were speaking to people and thanking them for support. And so here he's referring to a recollection of a meeting with you in a reference to Alex Owolade trying to get close to you. Again, do you accept that it's possible that this undercover officer was in a room when you did have a meeting? Is that possible?
I actually remember minute details during the inquiry. I don't think I met him with Imran Khan.
Could we move to page 10 in this document, please? So this is a continuation of the notes of this meeting between David Hagan and Mark Ellison. It's page 10, paragraphs 2 and 3. So this is the question from Mark Ellison. I understand public order issues, but it is a fuzzy line. Aspects of intelligence where covert intelligence about family is inappropriate. He says this, David Hagan says, looking back, it would not be done. I was a special branch intelligence officer. Part of being an intel officer, all information is valuable. Why did I report why they were going to get divorced? I was told that. Two options. The reason to report is that it does have public order implications. It was useful. NL, reference to Neville Lawrence, was much more malleable. DL, Doreen Lawrence, was very strong, very close to Suresh Grover. MFJ were interested in that because they would then have tried to get in with Neville Lawrence. It was within a closed circle. I did not expect it to be reported in the public domain. And so this is a reference to David Hagan justifying why it was necessary to report that the Lawrences were going to get divorced. And the justification that is put forward here is that the reason to report it is it does have public order implications and it was useful. Firstly, in relation to the specifics of that the Lawrences are going to get divorced, is that something that you discussed with anyone that could have included David Hagan?
Not at all. Actually, I was the last person to realize there were problems with the family. I didn't even know there were problems with the family. I don't ask personal questions. I don't get involved in people's personal unless they are to do with their mental health, etc. I have intervened and supported both of them. Very close to both of them. I didn't have a preference one or the other. I thought I got on with both Doreen and Neville during the inquiry and before that. Did it have public order implications? Absolutely not. Neither of them. They were very explicit about this when there was even a sniff of any public disorder that they did not want to be associated with that. They do not believe in violence, and that my role as a coordinator was to ensure there was no violence, there was no public disorder. And when there was issues of public disorder after the suspects came, I was asked explicitly by Neville and Darren to go down and sort it out, and I did.
Before leaving this document, I wonder if we can just go down on the same page. It's paragraphs 7 and 8. So this is WT, so this is David Hagan saying, I have a handler, I report to him, I would expect him to filter those things out. It was a climate of all intelligence being good. Then he says this, there were wolves circling the Lawrences, not be able to stop groups taking over the Lawrences. The objective was to report to prevent public order issues. This description, quite graphic, that is given here about wolves circling the Lawrences, was there any truth in that? Or what's your reaction to that language being used to describe the Lawrences at the time of the inquiry?
Absolutely not. There's no truth in, from my recollection, any wolf circling the Lawrences. You know, this idea that the Lawrences are incapable of differentiating who's a friend, who's not a friend is just ridiculous. That they need a gatekeeper and that he is there to stop the wolves circling the Lawrences. I just find that shocking. Most of the people who came to the inquiry were very supportive of the Lawrences. 95, 98%, I would say. And they wanted to influence the Lawrences. I think the people who were getting nervous about the Lawrences are the Metropolitan Police, not the wolves that he described.
I want to turn now to consider some of David Hagan's intelligence reports on you. And I don't wonder if we can just, there are a number of these. I wonder if we can just deal with one before the mid-morning break. It is, so at your tab B1, it is MPS 001120. So if we look at the date of this report, the 5th of June 1998, what I would like you to comment on is in terms of one of the issues that we're looking at is how accurate these reports were. So you can see it says that 4 members of the Movement for Justice attended the rally, about 30, at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry on the 2nd of June. At the rally, the spokesman for the family campaign, Suresh, so you, stated that he had been informed that the 5 suspects would be appearing during the week of the 15th of June. He stated that a demonstration would be planned for that time. However, those attending the rally, led and encouraged by MFJ, decried the lack of action so far and called for a demonstration sooner. The result was that the family campaign representative agreed to hold a planning meeting on the 5th of June and invited those present to attend. So in terms of that description, would you accept that in terms of accuracy, that's a fair reflection of what you set out as a spokesman for the family campaign? Would you say that's accurate?
We had meetings during the inquiry, in a different room where we reported back any new information that came to us, and I must have told people that the suspects were being asked to come on the week of 15th of June. I think the Lawrence family campaign and the people I were around were clear that a large number of people would be attending, and if there was going to be any action, we needed to ensure that there's going to be peaceful action, etc. So I can't tell you whether there were 4 or 5 or 6 members of the Movement for Justice. I think there may have been demands for a demonstration, but it's not something that the family campaign had agreed or discussed. I think we were just conscious that there were going to be a large number of people coming and that needed to be organised in a peaceful way.
All right, and this information, so it refers to you at a rally stating that you had been informed that the 5 suspects would be appearing during the week. Presumably, that information would have been available to everyone who attended the rally.
I mean, the timetable would have gone down, people would have known. There was a lot of speculation whether the suspects would turn up or not, so it was in the public domain and the press and the media reports were speculating whether they would come, what would be said, etc.
So I don't know whether that's a convenient moment to have a short mid-morning break.
Certainly. We will break for 15 minutes to enable both you and the transcribers to have a rest.
All rise.
please be quiet at the back. Please be quiet at the back. Thank you.
Mr. Grover, before the break, we were beginning to go through David Hagan's reporting on you and the monitoring group and the Lawrence Family Support Group. Now, I would like to turn to the next report. So it's at your B2. It is MPS 001129. Now, the last report that we were looking at was dated the 5th of June. And so you can see this report, dated the 12th of June, is about what happened on the 9th of June. And so in relation to these reports, you can see how tightly packed the dates are. So it begins by, if we look at the layout of the report, intelligence windmill tilter, which simply tells us this is David Hagan's reporting. But the title of the report is the Lawrence Family Support Group. We have, again, heard at various times during the inquiry that in relation to the reporting that was conducted by SDS UCOs, that to some extent they were hoovering up as much intelligence as possible. All intelligence is good intelligence, and it may be that on occasions that the reporting may have been peripheral. But what was your reaction when you read that the title of this report in June 1998 is the Lawrence Family Support Group, that the undercover officer David Hagan has produced an intelligence report, a special branch intelligence report on that group? What was your reaction to that?
I don't think we called ourselves the Lawrence Family Support Group. I think people saw it as a support group for the Lawrence campaign, but it didn't have a name. I just referred to it as the Lawrence Support Group. But so in terms of the name, that's what I think. In terms of Hagan and other people or other UCOs, whether it's Peter Francis, I think there is an attempt to get to the Lawrences through this support group, and they're trying to influence or then trying to get close to the family through this wider group.
Well, if we look at the first paragraph, we're not going to go through every line, but the first paragraph, on Tuesday the 9th of June, the Lawrence Family Support Group held their weekly meeting in a disused shop in the Elephant and Castle shopping centre. Approximately 40 people attended. So just pausing there, how easy would it be for someone to attend one of these weekly meetings? For example, could anyone attend, or how did you monitor that at the time?
There were public meetings, anybody could attend.
So again, in terms of the information that was discussed in the weekly meeting, this was not a private meeting with you and the Lawrences. This is something open to the members of the public. Is that right?
Yeah, it was reporting back on what had happened during the inquiry, just the pivotal points. So I'd be briefed by lawyers to do that, and then it'd be about what may be happening the week after, what the campaign's position was, and it was that kind of meeting. It was really about support group and listening to people on what they want, listening to people on what they think should be happening.
And an example of that is that it was known that the 5 suspects would be attending that inquiry. The question is, well, how to respond to that, how to act when they arrive.
Yeah, it would be the 5 suspects are attending. This is what the campaign would like to do, and hear from others what they think should be happening.
I'd like to go to the end of this page, please. So at the end, it says the group intend to let the 5 make a statement. So the group being a reference, well, the title Lawrence Family Support Group, the support group. The group intend to let the 5 make a statement, but if they do not give the answers they want, i.e. confessions, then anything could happen. Given the paucity of policing within the room, disorder should be expected. And then it goes on to say there's a possible way round of having security guards instead of police. What is your view of the accuracy of that statement, that anything could have happened and that disorder should be expected? Is that a fair report? Because if this is an undercover officer reporting back in relation to the issue of disorder, so one of the things that the SDS officers say they are looking at is, well, look, we have to have someone on the inside to see, well, if there is going to be disorder, then we can alert the rest of the police and measures can be taken. So when this officer says, well, there aren't that many police there, disorder should be expected, is that fair for the officer to say that? Is that given the circumstances?
It's an outrageous statement.
Why?
Because there was never any contemplation of any disorder within the room by anyone. There was never even a thought there'd be disorder. We weren't clear whether the suspects would make a statement or whether they'll answer any questions. The likelihood was that they wouldn't say anything. We were very conscious of that. And through the Lawrence family campaign, we devised what actions would take, which were very peaceful. For example, we decided that we would have T-shirts with Stephen's photograph on them, and that when the suspects came, we would turn our backs on them. It's a kind of action that we decided within the room. But any threat of any disorder within the room would have lost us immense credibility with the inquiry itself, which we were trying to work with. And I think it's an example of how Hagen is justifying spying, his spying of the Lawrence campaign, and it's really meant for his superiors to think that he's doing good work rather than resembling any real possibility taking place. And the public gallery, the Lawrence room was quite big, much bigger than this. There were spaces for public gallery, but the public gallery was very disciplined. There were reactions when officers said certain things which people didn't agree with, but it was always frustration. It was never anger, nobody being shouted at. There was always, there was obviously going to be, we had to be extra cautious, extra disciplined when the suspects came. And all sorts of arrangements were being made between myself to the Lawrence campaign and the commander on how that would be facilitated so it would be peaceful. But to suggest that there would be disorder in the inquiry, I mean, I just am totally outraged by that.
Well, let's turn to another of David Hagen's reports. It's in fact the same date. It's at your tab B3. It is MPS 001134. All right, and so in terms of this, so the previous report was about the weekly meeting on the 9th of June. This is about the 11th of June, and we can see it refers to 200 people attending a public meeting organised by the SWP. But if we could just go to the next paragraph, can you see where it says this? All four speakers gave strong speeches calling for support of the campaign. Grover, more outspoken than on previous occasions, stressed the importance of Monday and Tuesday when the 5 accused would be appearing. He was particularly angry over the treatment of Stephen Lawrence's mother, who had been searched that day prior to going into the inquiry. He argued that the police's incompetence was an attempt to cover up their systematic racism and corruption. He cited a number of examples from the inquiry proving his point. Now, in terms of the question, the factual question of the accuracy of this reporting, would you agree that that is a fair description of what happened? Four speakers giving strong speeches and you being angry about the treatment of Doreen Lawrence. Would you say, in terms of that reporting, that it is, in terms of on an accuracy scale, that it is at least accurate?
I mean, I would say there were very passionate speeches, strong speeches. There was, and I may have mentioned that Stephen Lawrence's mother would searched, and I would be angry with that. I think what he's done is my 15-minute speech, which goes through what has been exposed at the inquiry and what's in the public domain, he's actually put 3 or 4 sentences when they're out of context. So he's summarized the points I'm making inaccurately. So when I'm talking about police's incompetence, I'm talking about, for example, the surveillance operation on the suspects, how that was mishandled, which is in the inquiry. And I think when I'm talking about the cover-up of the systemic racism and corruption, I'm not just talking about the Lawrence case, but I'm talking about other cases, including the inspectors' reports within the police force who are talking about corruption, etc., etc.
Now, in terms of the risk to public disorder, if we look at the next sentence on this report, it refers to this. It says, will come up on screen, Grover did not elaborate on plans for within the inquiry room on Monday, and then this, but was keen to build the event as attendance inside the venue rather than a demonstration outside. So this appears to indicate that your focus was more on the attendance inside the inquiry venue rather than a public demonstration outside. Did that reflect your general attitude at the time, that it was inside the venue that was important rather than a wider demonstration outside?
He is not aware what the plans are for the Lawrence campaign within the room, which I've described already, which is about a peaceful show of support for Stephen's family. I am encouraging people to attend. I think it's important to hear what the suspects are saying. There is no real discussion whether there should be a demonstration outside. What I am doing at that moment with the inquiry is trying to persuade Sir William McPherson to allow us to use a massive room downstairs which belonged to Tesco's. And I've been to the Tesco's manager saying, can we use that room during the suspect's arrival? So I actually go to Sir William McPherson, I think with Ross Howells and Mrs. Lawrence, and say, we expect a large number of people, we are mobilizing for a large number of people, we are absolutely clear that there'd be no public disorder, but it's important for people who've experienced racism and people who want to know about racism to actually see for themselves what the evidence is within the well of the court. I want that to be...
What you're describing are practical steps that you sought to take to ensure attendance there. But if we turn to the last page of this report, under source comment, so this is David Hagan, you could see what is set out there in those 2 sentences. The general mood of those present was very angry. If similar numbers attend on Monday, there is potential for severe public disorder when the 5 appear. So what you've just described is, well, let's create some more space so that more people can participate in that inquiry. Again, would you accept, though, that the comment that is made here, looking at it from a public disorder or a risk of public disorder, is a fair one? You've got a very controversial inquiry into something very controversial with increasing numbers of people. Would you objectively say that that comment of David Hagan is fair in any way?
I'm not saying he shouldn't be concerned about public disorder. Anything can happen. I understand that variable. But I think there's an assumption here that when black people come together, there's bound to be public disorder. That's what I'm objecting to. The left and the black communities are very disciplined and very strategic in what happens. People don't stand up into violence because they think there should be violence. I think we were conscious that we didn't want public disorder. There'd be a possibility of it, but we will do everything possible to ensure there would be no public disorder in the room or outside. But there would be that threat, and it depended on 2 or 3 things. Firstly, what the suspects would say and do, and people may get angry about that. It's the only opportunity that the Lawrences would have to, and the public would have had to hear the suspects themselves who had refused to answer any questions. The second thing is how we were able to contain our own supporters within that period. And I think we were very confident through the Stephen Lawrence family campaign and the people that we had mobilized, including from independent left, that there was not going to be any threat of violence. And then when but there were going to be people, there's bound to be people who we didn't know. We were encouraging people to attend. We want a peaceful demonstration at the inquiry. Firstly, to hear the evidence, and second, to gather outside as a show of support for the Lawrences in a very peaceful way.
Right, and if we move to the next report, which is, so your tab B4, it is MPS 001145. So the report we were just looking at, dated the 12th of June, we're moving forward just to the 23rd of June. We can see this is a report on movement for justice, and it is the end of the second paragraph I just want to ask you about. So it says that MFJ, Movement for Justice, have lost faith in Suresh and the family campaign to progress the issue and see the 28th as a golden opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of MFJ and assist in raising its profile. And so the references to, and we will see this increasingly in these reports, references to a degree of tension between the movement for justice and the monitoring group and yourself. What's your reaction to reading, and we will see a number of examples of this, for example, the way in which it's put here that MFJ have lost faith in you. Could you
I have
help us
no
with
idea.
the accuracy
I
of
have
that?
no idea whether the MFJ had lost faith in me or not. I think there's not the issue of anger or more militancy. I think it's the issue about strategy. And I think what we are focusing on is the self-organization of a family who, through their own model and through their own resources and through their support, want to express their anger in a meaningful way to affect change, and they want to make representations of the inquiry. The inquiry is being reported on a daily basis. So through the inquiry, they're talking to the public, and I think historically there's the difference between the MFJ and campaigns that are coming from black communities, and I use that word in a pluralistic way, isn't about whether we are more militant or less militant. We are both angry about state institutions who do not want to acknowledge racism in any way, or do not want to acknowledge the violence that has been used on a daily basis on black communities and lack of investigation in race murders. The difference is there is an approach from some groups where they believe they're the vanguard of a resistance that's taking place, and us who are saying, actually, ordinary people can affect change. And for us, the issue is that anyone, whether it's a mother or a brother or a sister who experiences this injustice, has the capacity to run a campaign, affect change as fearlessly and as audaciously as anybody else. If the MFJ, and I don't want to digress, I think this is, as I said, this is a drama going on which is being reported by the undercover officer to justify his spying it. But actually what's happening at the inquiry is at the center is not affected by it. What's happening at the inquiry is not affected by my conversations with the MFJ. They're not influencing the Lawrence family. That's their frustration. And the reason why they're not influencing is because I can't see the strategy they have. Not because I think they are more militant or I'm less militant. The Southern Monitoring Group, even when it's charity, has red lines that if we are told not to support families who suffer racism, we'd rather lose the funding. It's not an issue for me. We are committed to that. So it's about the approach. It's about ordinary people having the effect of change. And that's why I think I've answered your question. I don't know. Was that?
Well, and we can sort of take that report down. The reports sort of touched on discussions about what would happen when the 5 suspects attended. And I just want to move to the next report, which serves at your tab B6. It's MPS Trebolo 1154. So this is moving to the 29th of June 1998. So we'll just get that up on screen. Now this is a more detailed report, more lengthy report, for we will see obvious reasons, because it describes on that date, the 29th of June 1998, between 500 and 600 protesters gathered outside Hannibal House to confront the 5 white youths who were due to give evidence to the inquiry that day. Now, just pausing there, in terms of the number of protesters that gathered outside Hannibal House that day, what influence did you have, if any, in relation to the number of protesters that attended on that date, please?
I would say that when I went down during the lunchtime to talk to people, I was able to influence a large number of them, maybe 70 to 80% of the people attending. I think there were more than 600 people. I think they were between 800 to 1,000. I mean, I'm not going to quibble about the numbers. I think people were there because they'd seen this epic battle between a black family and the Metropolitan Police, and it was being reflected within the inquiry because of the evidence that was taking place. And I think everybody was conscious that this is not time for violence. This is actually the first opportunity over decades, if not centuries, to convince a public judicial inquiry that there is the existence and prevalence of racism within the police force. And for that to be acknowledged would be historic, because it would create a sea change in how the police potentially change. So it's about being strategic, and it's about understanding that within the struggles against racism, the legislative process can be used as a tool to expose and change society, or racism within society.
In terms of the number of protesters here, was that any part of a strategy that you developed or contributed to the number on this particular date, so the day when the 5 suspects, a show of force, as it were?
Look, our position was we needed as large number of people to come on that day. It was very clear that we would be against any public disorder. To be honest with you, I only had to convince maybe 10 people about the issue of public disorder. The rest of the people were totally convinced and very disciplined. And what the variable that I couldn't control as the coordinator of the campaign was how the suspects would react. I had no clue how they would react. I didn't know whether they would come and what they would do. I didn't know that they would come out and do certain things, and I didn't want any violence against them. We, in the anti-racist movement, very conscious about people suffering violence as suspects, and so I wasn't going to allow, and there wasn't any strong proposition or prevalence or thought with the people I spoke before the inquiry about the use of violence or disorder.
Let's turn to your role as reported in this report. So if we turn to page 2, please, the top paragraph. So firstly, it refers to the appearance of a strike force from the Nation of Islam. Pausing there, those not familiar with the Nation of Islam, could you assist us with what you consider as being referred to there, a strike force from the Nation of Islam? What's that a reference to, please?
I don't know what a strike force is, to be honest with you. To be honest, it's the first time I've read that. I do know the Nation of Islam is an organization that were developed in the United States because of and believes in segregation politics to challenge the state on a various levels. But I was told by Mr. Lawrence that the Nation of Islam had approached him and he was quite happy for them to come, or that's the impression I got. But I don't know what a strike force is. I know the Nation of Islam dress in a particular way, with the glasses and suits, etc. But strike force sounds quite militaristic. I didn't get that impression on that day.
All right, and so just to continue on, so the appearance of a strike force from the Nation of Islam, who hitherto had played no part in the campaign, was viewed with dismay in many quarters, especially amongst the Lawrence family, who strongly disapprove of them. It is believed that Suresh Grover, who had been unsuccessful in obtaining volunteers to steward the protest, had allowed a small number of NOI, Nation of Islam, members to take on the stewarding role. However, the NOI arrived in strength and were acting totally independently of Grover or anyone else. So again, we're interested in this reporting of what was happening at the time by an SDS undercover officer. Would you accept that what he has set out here is at least accurate?
It's inaccurate.
In what way?
As I said, Mr. Lawrence, I think, was in touch with the nation and he had no objection to them coming. There was a very small discussion in the Lawrence campaign where what the impact would be the nation coming. And as we had said, we weren't going to be excluding any individual from coming into the public gallery to support stuff. We were aware that this would have perhaps negative reporting in the press, but I think we accepted that could be dealt with. There was never any discussion between myself or the Nation of Islam prior to the day when they arrived whether there would be any stewards from them. That is totally wrong. That's inaccurate. It's totally false. The stewarding had already been arranged prior to the day, and there were people from the support group who would be stewards. We had managed to get a number of stewards. We expected 150 people in the gallery. There was an order of who would be there. The family, both in terms of the Lawrence and Dwayne Brooks family and all that kind of stuff, the supporters, the space for press, etc. And so there was never a discussion between myself. I don't know whether there's a discussion between anybody else, between myself or the Nation of Islam on any form of stewarding. I saw them on the day. I didn't talk to them until the lunchtime. They actually approached me and I talked to them after lunchtime.
Now, if we move forward just a couple of paragraphs here, so it describes at the height of the disturbances, the Nation of Islam contingent emerged from the inquiry building and took up a thoroughly menacing stance as if stewarding the protesters. Then, when matters had calmed down, they attempted to re-enter the building only to be denied access. It was at this point that the trouble started up once more and resulted in police resorting to the use of CS gas in their efforts to restore order. So, public inquiry, the point has been reached that the police are deploying CS gas. And I want to ask you in relation to that, but from a public order perspective. You were there. Did you witness the deployment of the CS gas? Is this something that you were aware of at the time?
I only became afterwards. So what happens is this, in terms of the chronology. So around 9 o'clock, there are loads of people trying to get in. The public gallery is being filled by 9:30. And Alex is there with Movement of Justice. The Nation are there. Loads of people who want to enter are there. We had anticipated that large number of people come and they wouldn't be able to get into the public gallery, hence my conversation with Sir William McPherson. So what we decided was that there would be a rotation of people coming after an hour or so. And I only became aware of a disturbance after the inquiry started. And I think it's half an hour from the time we started. The representative of the nation burst into the room. I met them. They said they'd been CS gassed, and there were arrangements. If there are any disturbances take place, I would speak to the lawyers, and specifically Mr. Mansfield, and he would speak to, he would indicate to Sir William McPherson there'd be a break. That's exactly what happened. So I didn't see the public disturbance outside. I did see the disturbance after the suspects leave, and I play a role in that in terms of calming everything down.
And if we go forward just a couple more paragraphs, the paragraph beginning the end of the days. So that paragraph reads, the end of the day's proceedings saw a group of around 50 protesters attempt to attack the 5 white youths as they left the hearing. A number of missiles were thrown at the youths, and all 5 were liberally covered in spittle by the time they reached the sanctuary of the waiting van. The accuracy question, do you accept the accuracy of what David Hagan has set out here in his report?
I think he exaggerates the attempt to attack the 5 white youths. I knew the 5 youths had given their evidence and they're going to leave, so I was asked by the lawyers to go down as soon as possible to see what would happen and intervene if possible. When I was at the entrance of Hannibal House, the suspects came out spitting at people. I remember them spitting at members of the Southern Monitoring Group who were at the entrance. Then, I mean, I was quite shocked about their attitude, to be honest. They're street fighters. I'd never seen them before. They came out running, spitting, fisting, etc. Yes, there were people who threw cans at them, but there were barriers. They couldn't be hit. I was absolutely sure that the police, there would be barriers where they would go. And the barriers came from the entrance right to the van that they had, which they would get in and go. There was commotion, there's no question about it. The only incident that took place was between myself and one of the suspects, because I was in front of the...
You were at the front?
I was at the front of the lorry, and then I held Stephen Lawrence's banner in front of the van with my colleague. So they could see, I didn't want them to run away from Stephen's face. So I had Stephen's banner in front of the lorry, and basically that was the only incident that took place. And the discussions between myself and the commander was actually nothing seriously had happened. I spoke to the commander who was in charge that time. He intervened if anything would happen, and it finished. I mean, the suspects took about, I'd say, 2.5 minutes to leave.
What would you reply to this? If someone were to suggest that, well, you have described the first day of the inquiry, only about a dozen people there, the efforts that you have made to sort of bring people in, to bring this to more people's attention, and indeed the numbers increase and increase, and then meetings about what would happen when the suspects arrive, and then this particular date where you get hundreds and hundreds of people protesting, and leading to CS gas being used, and you just describing in one part of it, you being on the front. What would you say to someone who said, well, maybe there is some justification in having an undercover police officer who was able to report on you and what was going on? How would you respond to that? So from a public order perspective, maybe there was some justification in reporting on you and the group, because look what happened.
I mean, if there is going to be public disorder, you don't need undercover officers to plan to disrupt that. You can have ordinary police officers. There was communication between myself and the commander on the day, regular communication. I was told to have that communication. I met him prior to the inquiry. I met him on the day of the inquiry. I met him at lunchtime. I met him at the end. So if it's a public order offense, you can deal with it on a public order basis. It's not an issue. You do not need undercover officers to give you that information. Yes, I'm not saying the police should not plan for public disorder. What I'm saying is David Hagan is exaggerating that threat deliberately to justify his deployment as an undercover officer. But where he fails is he actually he's not close to us. He's trying to influence us. I don't know whether, I think I saw him on the last day of the inquiry. That's what I've been told. I've tried to recollect, whatever. And he's trying to influence about demonstrations. I think the information that he's giving is on peripheral groups that are trying to influence me and other people in the support group, like Asad Rahman in the support group, etc. And I have to say, I find the justification of deployment totally outrageous. This doesn't any warrant it. He would have done. I expect him to do research on me if he wants to.
Well, in terms of engaging with the police, you described on this particular day, yes, you were engaging with the police. Could you just give us an impression of how often, during this public inquiry, during the Stephen Lawrence public inquiry, you were in communication with the police, not undercover officers, but the police who were there and visible?
Whenever it was necessary, sir, it was, I act on behalf of the Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign. So if, for example, we are at the issue of the private prosecution in Greenwich, I think we were, if there was an issue of public disorder or any issue we had in terms of safety of the Lawrences, I would speak to the police. At significant moments of the inquiry, we'd flagged up, which were pivotal about information coming either from the police or the suspects coming, or when the Met Commissioner came. There was contact between myself and the commanders on a regular basis. That was just to make sure two or three things. Firstly, that we worked as a team to disrupt anything that was possible on the streets, and it wouldn't be coming from us. But there was never intelligence from the commander to me that there was any public disruption. He never said to me, I suspect this is happening. And it was about ensuring that the ethos of the inquiry as a public, where the people could attend, would always be kept, providing he was satisfied with the safety.
One more sentence in this report and we'll move on. It is the penultimate paragraph on this page, please. It is the last sentence there that says, it is fair to say, so this is David Hagan saying, it is fair to say that the day's events could easily have been more troublesome than they were had it not been for the controlling influence of Neville Lawrence. It is clear that the family themselves do not want any confrontation with the police other than on political grounds. In terms of this, would you agree that this, in fact, reflected reality? So again, in terms of the accuracy here, so this particular description, would you say that that is fair from David Hagan?
I'm just reading this. I agree that the protesters were made of individuals rather than specific political groups. I agree with that. I think a large number of people were individuals. I agree that the organized left, especially those mentioned, didn't have leading roles in the proceedings. I think the presence of the Lawrence family and their dignity helped calm things down throughout the whole campaign. I don't think it was necessary for either Mr. Lawrence or Mrs. Lawrence to intervene to stop this disorder. I was actually downstairs. I was asked to go downstairs, and as I said, apart from a handful of people, there was absolutely no hunger for disorder or violence.
Could we turn to the next report, which says at your tab B7, it's MPS 0739462. So this is a report that was typed up on the 15th of July 1998 and refers to a meeting at Hounslow Civic Centre on the 14th of July, where 150 people attended. Can I ask you about the... so we have a series of speakers. So we can see the first speaker was Mona Simpson, the mother of Joy Gardner, speaking on how people should work together to save the group which providing support for the relatives of victims who had died at the hands of the police. You can see various speakers, but where it refers to Neville Lawrence, so you can see the next speaker was Mr. Lawrence, father of Stephen. So here it says that he spoke for about 5 minutes, saying how he understood the pain that Mrs. Reel and Mrs. Simpson were going through. He did not ask for support or give an update on the inquiry. And then this, he also mentioned that he had been helped by the monitoring group. And so here, in terms of this reporting, would you agree that in terms of where the monitoring group is placed in terms of any influence regarding public disorder, that here you have a report that Neville Lawrence mentioning your group and saying that it had been a help. Again, in terms of sort of the accuracy of what was said in this meeting and the fairness of the reporting, would you agree that in terms of this reporting that it is a fair reflection of what was said and the reality?
I think it's a fair reflection. If the report, sir, is written in 98, is it?
It is the 15th, the report stated the 15th of July 1998.
The only kind of issue I have is we weren't called the monitoring group then. We only called monitoring group in 2000, so I don't know whether it is written in 98. We were only called the monitoring group in 2000, not in 98. We hadn't even thought of the name, the monitoring group, until 2000. So I think it's written after 98, not in 98.
Just on that, if we turn over the page of this report, you can see under the special branch references, and so there appears to be some aligning of the group. So you can see where it says the monitoring group, and it says identical with Southall monitoring group. And so it would appear on the face of the reporting that they were used interchangeably. But if we go back to the previous page, the last paragraph, because it refers to you giving a speech. So the next to speak was Suresh Grover. He was very vociferous on the inefficiency of the police on the Lawrence inquiry. He spoke of how Stephen's friend, who was with him at the time, gave descriptions of the suspects, yet the police failed to arrest. He claimed that police only arrested the suspects when they learned that Nelson Mandela was visiting the Lawrence family and wanted to impress a foreign dignitary. Apparently, Mandela arrived at the Lawrences at 8 p.m. one evening, and the arrests occurred at 8:45 p.m. Grover also went into the history of the suspects and their family backgrounds. He explained that the Stephen Lawrence campaign had no faith in the current Home Office inquiry and what would come out of it, as the suspects still wouldn't be convicted. He went on to say that they had insisted on the presence of Condon at the inquiry, but were made to do with his number two, whom they considered ineffectual. They had not been impressed by the apology offered by police. Now, in terms of undercover officer reporting, suggestions that certain reporting are fantasy and lies, some exaggeration. Would you accept, though, again, in terms of this and how you are characterised here, that in this example, that is an accurate summary of the speech that you gave? It's the sort of things, the sort of messages that you were communicating, and that the reporting on that is not, in this instance, exaggerated in any way. It's a fair reflection of what was said.
I don't think I would have said I don't have faith in the current Home Office inquiry. Mr. Lawrence is there, and both of us wanted to get to the end and get an outcome that the family wanted. I think there are things that are accurate there, but there are some of the things which are half-baked, which are his own impressions. It's true that I'm vociferous about the inefficiency of the police in the Lawrence inquiry, and I do give examples of where they're inefficient. As I said, I've spoke about the surveillance by police officers, the lack of search at Clifford Norris's house, which had come into the inquiry, and all that stuff. So it's all factual stuff. I'm a passionate speaker, but I'm not a speaker that is exaggerating, and I'm conscious that Mr. Lawrence is speaking on behalf of the family, and I'm just there to support him.
We've a different topic, but we've touched on it already. It's in relation to funding. I wonder if we could turn to, sir, it is at your tab B8. It's Intelligence Report MPS 001191, please. So this is a report, and you can see the date of it. So we are still in July 1998. It's really at the bottom of the report under source comments. So this is another of David Hagan's reports. It's this. However, groups such as the Newham Monitoring Project, NMP, and Southall Monitoring Group, SMG, may stay within the campaign as they are both in receipt of council funding regarding the inquiry. So there's a suggestion that you're going to be staying as a group in the Stephen Lawrence campaign for funding reasons. Is that fair?
It's totally inaccurate and made up. The Newham Monitoring Project had lost their funding by the time the inquiry comes, so they weren't funded. In fact, we raised money for one of their volunteers called Jilly Mundy to be part of the Stephen Lawrence family campaign. We raised it as the Southern Monitoring Group. So they weren't funded whatsoever, they lost their funding. We wouldn't, I'm just trying to read it properly, is to dwell beyond the mailers that they would not be allowed to be the directors. It's just, I don't know where he's got this from. The issue of our funding and we using it as a veto not to develop a campaign is insidious, and it's just shocking, I think. It's never come up before. As I said, you know, we have never been funded. We never applied for funding to work on the Stephen Lawrence campaign.
Something also that you've referred to already is that the work that you do with the families is that whilst you advise them, for example, on strategy, that they would take the lead in decision making. I just want to ask you about the next report, which sort of touches on that particular role. It is, sir, your tab B9. It is MPS 001212. So this is a report from David Hagan about a meeting arranged by the Stephen Lawrence Family Support Campaign on the 20th of July 1998. But it's paragraph 3 in which David Hagan has set this out. The meeting had been called largely as a result of pressure from the public activists to become more involved in the escalating campaign. However, Assad and Suresh presaged the meeting by stating that although they would readily listen to everyone, all that could possibly emerge from the meeting would be a number of suggestions that would be presented to Neville and Doreen Lawrence. It would be the decision of the Lawrences as to which courses of action would be pursued in furtherance of the campaign. And then this announcement left many of the audience wondering why they had bothered to attend the meeting. So again, in terms of the accuracy of what David Hagan is reporting, would you accept that he has described the position that you were in, so listening to people's various suggestions sympathetically, but ultimately it was decisions on strategy were finally for Neville and Doreen Lawrence to make, and we can see here, well, that left the audience a bit disappointed because you were not saying, well, yes, let's run with this particular idea. You were always needing to refer to them.
I think most of that is a fair reflection.
Yeah.
The last sentence I disagree with, which is most of the audience wondering why they bothered to attend. I think that's a minority of people who wanted to influence, take a leading role in the Lawrence campaign. Majority of people understood that the family campaign was going to be run and guided by the Lawrences. It didn't stop other people within the public gallery making statements. For example, an initiative by young people created the public gallery support group, right, who issued statements to the press. There are some things that the Lawrences couldn't say, something the legal people couldn't say. They weren't saying anything outrageous, but they wanted to give to the press what the feeling of the public inquiry was, the public at large was. For me, that strategy of being inclusive, of people taking ownership on this issue because they themselves have suffered it, their voices too had to be heard. What I disagreed with was that if you are doing something in Stephen Lawrence's name, you can't do it without the expressed consent of the Lawrence family. That's what the disagreement is.
Now, this report goes into, you can see it's quite a lengthy report and covers a number of topics. And I just want to ask you about some of the main significant ones. One relates to Alex Owolade, and I wonder if we could just turn to page 2. It's the last 2 paragraphs on page 2. So you can see what's reported here. Having reached what he saw as the conclusion of the meeting, Assad began to administer the closing rites, only to be stopped by Alex Owolade, MFJ, who called for a vote, saying that the meeting had not yet decided upon anything. At this point, Assad and Suresh remonstrated with Alex for trying to override the wishes of the Lawrence family. However, the crowd quickly got behind Owolade, and in order to quieten things down, it was quickly agreed that a further meeting should take place on Monday, the 3rd of August. So again, is that fair reporting of your position in relation to the Lawrence family, but the references to it being overridden by Alex Owolade, MFJ, and the tone of what's described here as the tension there? Is that a fair description? It's a meeting, a heated meeting. Is that fair? What's described in that paragraph?
The first paragraph?
Yes, the one. Yes, the first one. Yeah, the top one.
Look, as I said, these are meetings. This meeting in particular was not more than 20 people, maybe 30 people at the most. We're at the end of the inquiry, really the end of the inquiry. And what's being discussed is what we do as supporters to come together post the inquiry. So there's an issue about a social being held in South London where one of the footballers was going to attend. And is actually trying to thank the supporters. And, as far as I'm concerned, Alex has a different view of how we should move, and he's entitled to his view. And he felt always necessary to be at the center of that discussion, and we were always trying to take it back to the Lawrence family, etc. So I think, I don't know whether it's a reflection that the large number of people were behind Alex. I think this is a reorganized meeting after the first one, just to discuss some elements.
Can you see in sort of what is referred? You can see the language used in the next paragraph about sort of drama, but particularly in terms of an angry confrontation taking place. Is this just is your evidence that this is just the rough and tumble of a meeting, the angry confrontation? And whilst that's correct, this is not a public order issue.
No, not at all. It's a disagreement between people who want to have a stake in the Lawrence campaign. There's no public order issue at all. When the left come together, there's always a disagreement. Somebody will say the sky is blue and it's red and all that kind of stuff. That happens quite a lot in a lot of meetings. And Asad and I are trying to be inclusive and say, look, you guys need to attend if you want to. We have differences. And people are trying to snatch tickets of the social from me. I thought it was a bit childish. I didn't think it was a public order dispute. And I think, as I said, that it's not, I mean, what, in the context of the Lawrence inquiry and the spying, this is a drama that is irrelevant to the central play that is taking place. And it's amazing to me that the undercover officers get only this kind of information to report to his managers. It has no bearing on the strategy. It has no bearing on the disputes that are taking place. This is about distribution of tickets and what should happen. That's it.
This report doesn't end there. And if we turn to page 3, it's the second paragraph on page 3. We've touched upon this topic before, but you can see here it is in the body of David Hagan's report, both the NMP and the SMG realise that an expanding campaign can only be built with the help of activists in other groups, but they cannot get the Lawrences to realise this. Both groups are also intent on keeping themselves on side with the Lawrences, as they are both fighting with their councils for renewed funding and see the high profile of the Lawrence campaign as a major factor in securing further funding. Suresh went on to explain that Doreen and Neville have in reality separated and that they only continued together as a front for the campaign. Doreen, in fact, wishes to wind the campaign up at this point and simply await the findings of the inquiry. Neville is more open to continuing, but only until inquiry releases its findings. Now, you've already commented your evidence about the funding point, but what about this reference to you explaining, and this is in the context of a meeting about the Lawrences separating. Is that a fair report of what you said?
No, it's not a fair report. There was no need to expand the campaign at the end of the part one of the inquiry. We were still on to the second part, which was coming much later. The idea of what happens to the campaign, the discussions only take place at the end of the second part of the campaign and just before the publication of the report. And there's discussion within the Stephen Lawrence campaign on what should take place. There's definitely a discussion between Mr. Mansfield, Imran and myself and Lawrence is on what should take place, and the idea of a civil rights movement comes to. The Lawrences haven't decided at that time, as far as I understand, to wind up the campaign because we are still waiting for the second part of the inquiry, and I know Mr. Lawrence wanted to take an active part in some of the proceedings that took place in the second part of the stuff. So I don't know whether he's getting the dates mixed. This is not the discussions taking place at the end of the first part of the inquiry, but similar discussions take place prior to the publication of the report.
Now, if we go skip 2 paragraphs further down to some more reporting, this is very...
And sorry, I didn't say what
Yes.
he's alleging me to say, that they're separated.
And just to be so clear on that, when David Hagan in this report says Suresh went on to explain that Doreen and Neville have in reality separated, that's incorrect.
It's totally inaccurate. I think there are other reports where which I've read, which says that it is Dwayne Brooks, and I think that is totally inaccurate as well. So I think I don't know why it's being attributed to me. I think it's totally inaccurate.
Something else that is reported that you said is in the paragraph beginning, as can be seen. So in this paragraph, this is what David Hagan says. As can be seen, Suresh had fully calmed down by this stage and apologised to Alex for his actions. He then proceeded to give out tickets to everyone who was left, including the MFJ, in privacy. He stated that he was of the same politics as Alex and personally wanted a huge demonstration as soon as possible. He also said that there was someone very close to the Lawrence family who was an Uncle Tom and, as a police agent, was actively advising the Lawrences against any real action. Now, there are a number of points that are packed into that paragraph, but this reference in the middle to you stating that you're the same politics as Alex Owolade and you personally wanted a huge demonstration as soon as possible, is that accurate?
No.
In particular, the last sentence, he, referring to you, also said that there was someone very close to the Lawrences family who was an Uncle Tom and as a police agent was actively advising the Lawrences against any real action. Do you know what is being referred to there at all?
You need to call David Hagan as a witness or ask him. I can't answer that question. I mean, it's not how I speak. I know what Uncle Tom means, but I didn't have any suspect in the Lawrence campaign being an Uncle Tom or a police agent. As I said, there is, what I was concerned about was how the police would react to individual people within the Lawrence campaign, how they would treat Imran at the inquiry, how the Lawrences would be interviewed or cross-examined. That's the kind of thing I'm interested really working out, and how they would see the Southall Monitoring Group and how the campaign was. I wasn't at all concerned about police intrusion into the campaign. I didn't even think about it, to be honest with you. I don't think about it now, otherwise there'd be absolutely no point in helping families doing the campaigns that we are still doing. And you just get immersed in the work, and you don't think there are police agents, etc. So for that language, for me I don't use that kind of language. And I would, in the Stephen Lawrence family campaign, I can name all the individuals. There were disagreements about strategy, but to call them police agent in front of somebody that I have no relationship in a public meeting is just, I don't know why he does it. I think it's a pity he's not giving evidence. That's one of the questions that he needs to be asking.
Keeping with David Hagan's reporting, but just moving further forward in time, if we could please turn up MPS 001314, so it's your tab B13. So this is a report that was typed up on the 18th of September 1998, and you can see Stephen Lawrence Inquiry Stage 2. And in relation to this report, he says, the Movement for Justice were disappointed with the turnout for its demonstration at the opening of Stage 2 of the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry on Wednesday the 16th of September. Only about 20 people attended. In addition to a low attendance from its own members, Suresh Grover had sown confusion by telling other parties, such as Privacy, that he had organised meeting with the judge the following week on the 24th of September. So this reference to you sowing confusion by telling others that you'd organised a meeting there, could you assist with what your understanding of that relating to? What is that about, please?
Honestly, I don't know I don't remember. Suresh Grover has sown confusion by telling other parties such as that they had organised a meeting with the judge the following week on 24th September 1998. I don't think that is true. I don't remember organising a meeting with Mr. William McPherson in September 98. I don't see what the... I mean, we've done... So this is taking place at the second stage of the inquiry, right?
Yes.
I don't have a meeting with Sir William McPherson. The Southall Monitoring Group is giving evidence in the second stage of the inquiry at Ealing Town Hall. Mr. Lawrence is present, and we in our submissions include the Manson and the Real family to give evidence, but I don't have a meeting, as I recall. There would be no reason for me to have a meeting with Sir William McPherson.
To what extent would you agree with, we can see under source comments of the next paragraph, this characterisation of you by David Hagan? It appears that Grover has decided to distance himself from the MFJ in an attempt to keep in favour with Neville Lawrence. He was urging the Lawrences to organise a mass march and to form a civil rights movement, but to date Lawrences have refused to name the date of the march. So this characterisation as you are trying to keep in favour with Neville Lawrence, how would you characterise that description of you?
It's utterly wrong. As I said, I was the campaign coordinator for the Lawrence family. I don't need to get favours from Mr. Neville Lawrence. I agreed with his proposition on how things should move. I don't need to distance myself from the movement for justice. There isn't, I'm cordial to them, I listen to them, but I don't see a strategy from them. So there's nothing apart from a demonstration that needs to take place And our response is very simple. If you want to do it under the Stevens name, the family have to have consent. You want to have an anti-racist demonstration in MFJ, please go ahead and do it. I have no issue with that. So I'm not stopping them doing things, but I'm asking them to respect the Lawrence family if they're using Stevens' name.
Before we break for lunch, I want to ask you just about one entry in another report. It is MPS 001370, which is, so your tab B14. This is moving on in 1998, so this is October 1998. The title, we can see Movement for Justice Lawrence Inquiry. But what I want to ask you about is on the second page, the third paragraph there. It says, Mrs. Reels had asked the MFJ to attend the Southall Monitoring Group AGM on Monday the 5th of October to speak to Suresh Grover about the need for the march. Grover himself appears to have lost some of his interest in the Reels case in favour of concentrating his efforts on the Menson case. In terms of this description there, the tone of it, the accuracy of it, and how that affects you when reading that, could you help us with your reaction to seeing that in an undercover officer report?
I don't know whether Mrs. Reel asked the movement to attend AGM, but to insinuate that I lost interest in Reel's case in favour of concentrating on Manson, it's contemptuous. I've spent with Reel family from 14th of October 97, and I'm still working with them. They're in the gallery, so I just find I really think that he's justifying these splits and my motives to justify his quality of gathering of intelligence to his managers, and I'm just horrified that he suggests that. I don't know whether he's doing it deliberately to tell his managers that he's needed and he's looking at the differences taking place. The second thing is, what is the motive of saying all this? Unless he's saying that the intelligence officers of the Met should take advantage of the splits, allegedly splits, or the lack of concentration in my support for the Reels family. You can't have it both ways. On one hand, you say, I'm trying to get the Reels to give my credibility with the Asian community, and then I lose it and go to the Manson family. What am I doing? Getting credibility in the Afro-Caribbean community, the African community? It's just full of lies.
So I don't know if that is a convenient moment to break.
Certainly. We will resume at 2.
All rise.